Madhani is the co-founder and executive director of Lighthouse, a nonprofit dedicated to narrowing the nation's literacy gap by building equitable and inclusive literacy experiences for children and their families. Rina began her career as a teacher in the Bronx and saw both her students and families struggle, one student sharing that they were terrified of becoming another Bronx statistic. Rina and her co-founders launched Lighthouse during COVID when access to libraries was cut off. They began with pop-up community events to distribute customized literacy toolkits. Today, Lighthouse leads in-person interactive workshops led by nationally recognized and award-winning BIPOC authors and illustrators. Outschool.org is proud to partner with Lighthouse to provide specific support for migrant students working towards biliteracy.
Thank you so much for joining us. And the podcast is called Outspoken, and we love to start with the question, what are you most outspoken about in education?
Oh my gosh, I feel like there's so many things that are sitting with me. I think for me, the most important piece is the idea of culturally relevant education. And I think that's really at the core of what we do within Lighthouse. I think it's just so important for students to be able to have environments where they're able to see themselves reflected, especially in the stories that they read, the lessons that they're learning within the classroom, but also the teachers and the role models who are ultimately guiding and molding and shaping that. And I found that, just within our education system, the way it's structured, I do think that we overlook the significance of representation, especially for students that are coming from historically underserved communities. And I also believe that education should be more than just academics. I've found that when I was a classroom teacher, many of my students just internalize themselves as a reading level. Oh, I'm a level J. This is my lane. This is where I should be. But I really think that academics should be viewed as this, tool for social change and personal growth. And we need to be focused beyond just test scores, right? That's just one part of the system. But we need to be thinking about how we're prepping the next generation of change makers within our system.
Rina, I'd be curious to hear, what does culturally relevant education mean to you? Because I think we do find ourselves having this conversation at a point in time where I think those words put together could also have very different connotations depending on who you're talking to. And I think I've had the great privilege of being able to visit some of your sites and seeing the wonderful books and even hearing the authors read them and have a sense of what they look like for you. But I would just be curious if you could share with our listeners your perspective on that and the kind of some of the examples of what that looks like in terms of books and literature that your kids have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it's really about creating access to stories where our students are able to find their own lived experiences, their cultures represented, and that when they're diving into a particular text or story, that they've found that their experiences are really being validated, that they feel seen, they feel valued. These are stories that can really help our students just foster this positive sense of identity, the sense of belonging. And we're also, using literature to have conversations around identity, racism, social justice with our students. And we're also empowering teachers to be able to do the same through this social justice-based curriculum that we've designed in-house at Lighthouse.
Amazing. And how do you know if it's working? My understanding is you've got a lot of research and experience behind, why these culturally relevant books and instruction are so important. It'd be great if you could share that with us.
Yeah. So I think for us now that we're moving towards this model of establishing these permanent literacy hubs, it really allows us to become this integral part of the school community. And alongside that, we're providing instruction for our students during the day, after school, in the summer. We're also engaging their family members and caregivers to be part of this reading experience and journey alongside them. And what we've found is just through the interactions that we have with our students when they come into the Literacy Hub, where they just share about how they feel safe. They feel safe being in the space. And I think that's the most important thing, especially given the fact that many of our school partners, they're constantly dealing with the sense of chronic absenteeism. Many of our students aren't even able to make into the school building, but when they do come, they feel like they have this literacy hub. They have this environment in their school where they feel like they can authentically be themselves and lean into who they are. Or when a family member or caregiver comes up to me during a family workshop and they're so excited about a story that they have in their hands, and they tell me that they didn't even have literature like this when they were growing up. And now the fact that they have a story like this that is bilingual in nature, that they can now read alongside their child at home and be able to support their child's literacy journey. I think for me, those are the stories that really stand out. But from an evaluation standpoint, we've started to do a lot of work with Columbia University's Center for Public Research and Leadership. And they have been tremendous supporters of our work, but also allowing us to dive deeper into how are we evaluating our impact here. And so they've helped us create a rubric that allows us to just assess the culturally responsive nature of our curriculum and how that's ultimately impacting the students that we work with. We also survey students 3 times throughout the year. We're, speaking directly to administrators, teachers, parents. They've also helped us create conversation protocols so that we can conduct focus groups with families. And then alongside that, we do look at academic data that's now being collected, right? And acknowledging that's just one piece of the puzzle. And not everything can be attributed to Start Lighthouse directly, but when we can piece all these things together, there's a narrative that's emerging, and we're finding that, many of our students are starting to see growth gradually, but it's happening. And so it's, we're moving the needle slowly.
Rina, I would love to hear more about your genesis as an organization. I think that, I think for me, and I think Amir and everyone on this conversation, we know that there's a literacy crisis in this country. But I think a lot of people that I talk to outside of education are often surprised at the extent of it. Or when I talk about the work that organizations such as yourselves are doing, are even surprised that there has to be a third-party organization or some party outside of a school that would be doing such a thing. Because I think a lot of folks have an expectation, perhaps rightly so, that that's what schools do. Yeah. And so I would just be really curious, and Rina, in your own words, where did the idea from Start Lighthouse come from, and why is it necessary in this moment for an organization like yours to exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the idea for Start Lighthouse, really emerged from my own upbringing. So I grew up in Chicago. I'm a product of the public school system there. Both my parents are immigrants, and for me, I spent a lot of my formative years alongside my grandparents. So English wasn't my first language. In fact, I mastered Hindi and Gujarati simultaneously before I moved to English. But for me, it was my 3rd grade librarian, Mrs. Malice, who I still remember to this day, who had such a profound impact on me and just opened up this world of possibilities. And, under her watch, I really blossomed. I grew to love reading. I became a proficient reader. And we just know how essential that is, especially at such a young age. And I really do attribute a lot of the success that I've now found in my adult years to that teacher figure, that librarian that I had in 3rd grade. And so I think that's really what drives me in particular when I think about the organization that we're building. But ultimately, from Chicago, I came to New York. And after I graduated from undergrad, I spent 2 years serving in AmeriCorps, where I was working in East Harlem, supporting a reading intervention program where we had students that were either half a year behind to 2.5 years behind their grade reading level. And so we were training community volunteers and working one-to-one with our students. And the growth that they were making was just so tremendous. And I would say that was really the light bulb moment that went off for me, where I thought, I think this is my time to step into the classroom full time and become a teacher, which was quite shocking to my parents because they thought I would come to my senses at some point, but I didn't. And so I ultimately stepped into the classroom, and my first year teaching, I was placed as a teaching fellow at a public high school in the South Bronx, and I was teaching 10th grade English. And what was so disheartening for me to see during that time was that fact that I had 10th graders that were still reading at a fourth or fifth grade reading level. And then simultaneously, I was expected to be able to prepare them for the English Regents exam, which was a requisite for them to be able to graduate from high school, but they couldn't even access the text. They couldn't even read the directions itself. And I think that was really what sparked my interest in early literacy intervention in terms of how early does it actually start and what supports can we put in place so that students don't reach the 10th grade and they're, left behind. And we haven't set them up for success at that point. And I moved into elementary education. And during the pandemic, I was teaching. And in March 2020, when schools closed, libraries closed, and we were just in this period of unknown, I got a call from one of my students' parents just asking for additional learning materials, resources. And the number one thing that they really needed access to was books. And the mother was just so worried that her child would fall further and further behind when it came to reading. And that was really the spark to get Start Lighthouse off the ground. It was a call from a parent, but I felt like I had a call to answer from the community at large. And I think an organization like Start Lighthouse is just so important and timely because it's all about creating access. And for us, what we found is that, we're creating access, but we're also mobilizing. We're creating this ecosystem of stakeholders, and where we're working hand in hand to be able to take on something as deeply systemic as illiteracy. We live within the school. We're ultimately guests within the school building, but then we're working closely with the leadership team. We're working closely with the superintendent. We're working with the PTA, the parent coordinator, families, students. And that's how, we found the most success with the approach that we're taking.
That's amazing. And it sounds really kind of deeply embedded into the community and personalized for the community, which sounds incredible. Right now in the tech ecosystem, there's a lot of discussion about the role of technology in education and AI. And I was curious as to, in your model, do you see opportunities for technology, or what opportunities are you taking advantage of today, and what opportunities do you see in the future?
Yeah, I would say that, we are thinking intentionally about the role that tech can play, especially within our literacy hubs, but when we're also thinking about the extension of learning that can take place in our students' homes as well. And we're really interested in being able to leverage tech to further support many of our English language learners. 65% of our students are English language learners today. And so Spanish is just a tremendous need. But then we also have other students that are coming in that, primarily speak French or Bangla. And so we don't necessarily have many resources or even books available that are translated in those languages. And so we're really thinking about even just how tech or AI specifically could be leveraged to customize resources for students that are multilingual, and how we could best support them. But I would say that the work that we did and we've been doing with outschool.org has been so tremendous in terms of being able to provide an extra layer of support for our English language learners, especially in an after school, but also in a summer programming capacity for them to be able to have that individualized attention, this live tuition that's taking place to really be able to support them in improving their English proficiency, but also be able to be with a teacher that really reflects who they are. And I think that alignment is also very important to us.
Rina, you mentioned the kind of sheer diversity of the students that you serve, which is, I think, both an incredible representation of your organization, but also like just the diversity of the South Bronx and of New York City. But I think, we know, and I know that a lot of the students that you serve are coming to these schools as a result of migration and immigration, and find themselves in oftentimes very unstable situations as they kind of find home and footing in this country. And, and that certainly affects the state of mind and the state of health that a lot of the students that you're serving are in as they come to school. And as someone who just has the vantage point that you do to kind of the state of immigration and migration in New York City in particular, and kind of we're that finds the children and kids that you serve, how are things going, right? How are schools and have the schools that you work with been able to serve those students, serve those families? And are there areas and opportunities for kind of increased support that you can see or that you do see from your vantage point?
I would say that our school partners are absolutely doing their best to be able to meet many of these students' needs. But I think that, many of our students are just experiencing such a unique set of challenges. I think there's just so much trauma that they're carrying in terms of the displacement that they've encountered, and even just leaving behind their homes, or even in many cases, some of their family members. And also acknowledging that, for many of our students, this is the first time that they're even entering a school. And we have, 12-year-olds that actually have never set foot in a school building prior to coming to our school site in the Bronx. But for schools, they're doing their best, but I would say that resources that they have available are, often stretched thin. And I think there's such a demand for just specialized support from an academic standpoint, but also emotionally. And I think that's what they're finding a bit overwhelming in terms of how to best support these students with not only learning English, right, but then also giving them access to just the mental health services that they need just to process the experiences that they've had, but also allowing for opportunities for them to become better integrated and to be able to connect with the new community that they're in. And I really believe that we need to put more of an emphasis on just collaboration related to social emotional learning, and even just after school programs specifically for students, where they're able to find a more of a tailored environment to themselves, where they can, freely express themselves, and it just feels like this safe and welcoming space. The other piece is just the community engagement. We need to also ensure that we're actively involving families in this experience and listening to them and connecting them with the resources that they need. And so that's part of the work that, we have been actively doing with the parent coordinators in our respective school sites, is surveying families, connecting with them in WhatsApp groups, just to understand what do they need in real time. And when we think about these literacy hubs that we're creating within the school building, we are also ensuring that we're meeting the community where they're at and bringing in the resources that they're requesting. So we've had, several lawyers come in previously just to be able to provide some initial immigration information to families that they're, actively requesting, just to be able to understand, what are their rights. We've also partnered up with other CBOs around just food distribution, just to be able to get families just the real-time resources that they're requesting. I think for us as an organization, we just want to be able to think of ways that we can just further embed family members and caregivers in this literacy experience and journey, and also be able to support them too as they're, assimilating to this new community and culture too.
That's incredible work. And, when I heard you say before about surveying learners about how things are going, and now as well surveying families about what they need, just made me reflect. I remember in my schooling, I don't think I was ever asked to survey a learning experience, like providing a grade. I was certainly provided with many grades.
Yeah. Our kids weigh in on everything. They have an opinion, and they create space for them to share. But I think that's also a testament to the school partners that we found and selected, because that, starts from the higher up, and that, it's part of the school's culture. So it just feels so normalized for them to be able to vocalize and be able to really express themselves in that sense.
Yeah, really customer centric. And Rina, you're such an amazing change maker in education. And I'm inspired by you, and I'm sure our listeners will be as well. But you must also know other change makers in education who you admire. I wonder if you could share some with our listeners. Who would you like them to know about?
I have a list. Let me pull it up. One individual in particular is a dear friend of mine. Her name is Allison Schilliford. She is the founder of Navigate the Maze to Achievement. She founded her nonprofit organization back in 2016. And it's created with the intent to be able to help Black and Latino students prepare for New York City's specialized high school admission exams. And what I love about Allison's work is that she's really keen on supporting students on their social, but also their academic growth throughout their high school journey. And she's just seen tremendous success with the cohort of students that she is actively supporting. So I'm a deep believer in the work that she's doing. Another individual is Noniqua Ramos, who is both an educator as well as an author who's Bronx born, and we feature in our programming who the kids absolutely adore. I would say that Noniqua is really the one that, is just been so instrumental in bringing just authentic voices to literature. And I think her storytelling is just so inspiring, and especially her commitment to uplifting Latino stories in particular, especially within today's educational landscape. And then the last person is Nick Okafor. He is leading an organization called Truewell & Co. And what I find interesting about his work is that he is approaching STEM education in particular, but doing so through both the lens of community empowerment and also equity. And he also integrates these geospatial tools with social justice, which I've never heard of anyone doing prior to this. And I think that's really a testament to him and what he's building. But that's ultimately the type of innovation that we really need to see in education today. So those are the change makers that I really admire and that I closely follow just for inspiration on my own.
That's awesome to hear, particularly because Nick is actually a friend.
Oh, really? Oh,
so certainly does incredible work. And so it's
yeah,
to hear him get his flowers on. Rina, I think I'm really curious, you've mentioned a lot of kind of change makers who have started their own initiatives. You are very much on that journey yourself, right? As a social impact entrepreneur and as an education entrepreneur. And I'd be curious just to hear kind of how you've gone about starting and running your organization, because I think there are so many educators in particular and folks out there who are eager to make change in their communities, but the how of it can particularly, I think, be daunting oftentimes. And so, to the extent that you're willing to share, I would love to just, hear what advice you have for other folks who are thinking similarly. And also, what are kind of some of the first steps that you've taken that have made you able to start and build a kind of sustainable organization?
And I will say that for me, when I look back on the 5-year plan that I built for myself, I never thought I would be a nonprofit founder. So this all came to me as a bit of shock too. But it also, I think about every aspect of my life thus far and, every role that I've held and how every experience ultimately led me to where I'm at today and really did prepare me to take this on, even though there are so many things that I still don't know about running a nonprofit organization. And I always say that I'm learning on the job, and I always, keep an open mind, which I think is incredibly important because we're also working within the New York City Department of Education. So that comes with its own fair set of challenges. But I think for us, in terms of building Start Lighthouse, it came about so organically because we were constantly listening to the community. And so the community was building alongside me. Because when the organization began, my true purpose was just to be able to get books in the hands of students and families that needed them the most, to really be able to put the power of reading back in their hands and to build out these robust home libraries. And so that was an intervention that I did all throughout the pandemic. And then when schools reopened, I started to collect feedback from teachers, students, administrators, and I heard that students have just fallen out of love with reading. They're not reading. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what if we could create this immersive experience where, we can help them fall in love with reading? Think about a Scholastic book fair, but it's completely free. And so we launched our Literary Adventures program. And so that's where we bring in authors and artists that look like our students. And they, lead these interactive workshops, and our students are able to create a finished piece of writing and artwork that ultimately goes in their portfolio. But then the program would culminate in the building of a home library. So students would enter a space which we would convert and would feel like a flagship Barnes and Noble, and they would be able to go from having 0 books at home to having 5 just within the span of 1 week alone. So that program itself felt very high impact. And I led that program all across schools within the Bronx. And then I uncovered the fact that there are entirely underutilized, underfunded library spaces within the hearts of our public schools. And over 55% of schools in New York City do not have functioning school libraries or school librarians, and that these spaces actually operate as glorified storage units for the school. And so the students don't have access. And that's when I listened to the community once more. I gathered the superintendent, the administrators, and proposed the literacy hub model with Start Lighthouse coming in, rehabilitating these spaces, bringing them back to life, and staffing them year-round, providing programming during the day, after school, in the summer, ensuring that the work that we do in the hub is in alignment with the school's curriculum, and that we can just further enhance what they're already doing in the classroom within the hub. But again, all of this to say is that we were constantly building alongside the community. That is who I've continuously centered in my work. That is who I consult, and that is how the organization has grown so quickly over the past 4 years, as we've done this hand in hand with them. And so I would say that's one piece of it. And then the other is that even if you have an idea, you can start so small. I started during the pandemic, and I was the one alongside the principal setting up with a table at schools that were operating as meal distribution sites. And that's how Start Lighthouse began.
No, that's incredible, Rina. I mean, I just, I think this goes to the point of our conversation earlier, but it astounds me that 55% of schools in New York City, of all places, I mean, maybe of all places, because I grew up here and went to New York City public schools, and libraries were such a formative part of my experience, that the fact that more than half of schools don't have that, it's like, I mean, how did we get there?
Yeah, it's such a disgrace. I mean, the first literacy hub that we opened at a public school in the Bronx, pre-K to 8, and there's over 700 students at that school. That school did not have a functioning library for the past 16 years. So 16 years, students are going to school without a functioning school library. At one point, the gym teacher was acting as the librarian. That's where we're at right now when we think about access. And I know that's not necessarily the reality when you go to schools in other boroughs, or when we're looking at other zip codes within the city, where there's some schools that actually have 2 libraries within their school building.
And how does that, I mean, is that a matter of like city level appropriations, or is that decisions by the DOE, just in terms of like how the sausage is made? How does it end up from a financial and like budget appropriation standpoint, that some schools have funding for 2 and some have funding for 0?
I think it's also contingent on, depending on where the school's located. If they have an active PTA that's bringing in big dollars, sometimes they're able to use that as a channel to fund other programs within the school. So potentially they can use a PTA fundraiser to be able to bring in a full-time school librarian and to be able to keep that space active. But for many of the school partners that we work with within the Bronx, they don't even have that as a line item within their budget in terms of being able to have a school librarian. Again, many of our school partners are also facing teacher vacancies. So one of the schools we work at, they still are, missing 4 teachers. So for them, they're going to prioritize filling those positions rather than trying to hire a school librarian. And that's also the tough position that they're finding themselves in.
Yeah. I think it's just, it's weird to live in a society where the onus is on parents to be able to like fund a crucial like literacy program, So I don't know, hopefully that changes, and your work is a model for how that can change.
Justin, makes you wonder where our tax dollars are going.
I know. Fuck.
Yeah, it's crazy. The other piece is that, their budget is also contingent on their enrollment numbers too. And so if their enrollment numbers go down, they can easily lose anywhere between 300,000 or more from their budget.
Yeah. I mean, to get really spicy, I wonder what the conversion rate of every bomb to public library is. How many public libraries per bomb? Maybe they could write that on the side of the bomb instead of politicians' names. That'd be an interesting stat.
Yeah, it's just so troubling to me because I think about my journey as a learner and, I hold that so close to me. And so now with Start Lighthouse, sometimes I always say that the spaces we're building are the spaces that I know I needed when I was younger at one point.
Yeah. Well, Rina, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
For the work that you're doing.
Thank you. This has been so wonderful. And I have to say, I'm just so tremendously honored to be here, but also just for the work that outschool.org is doing, because that partnership has just been so tremendous for us as a grassroots organization, but has deeply touched our school partners, but also the students and families that we're supporting actively.
And likewise, it's been such a privilege for us to be able to walk alongside you and your learners and families, because just like you, our work only grows as a result of our commitment to partnership and the communities that we serve. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rina.
Oh, thank you.